In the First Age of Middle-earth, the elven kingdom of Doriath existed in a state of suspended bliss. Protected by an impenetrable magical perimeter known as the Girdle of Melian, its inhabitants were entirely sealed off from the ash and slaughter of the broader continent, where the Dark Lord Morgoth held total supremacy. Into this untouchable forest stumbled Beren, a starving, hunted mortal man whose family had been wiped out by Morgoth's forces. There he laid eyes on Lúthien, an immortal elven princess born of a divine angelic being. Despite the immense gulf in their origins, Beren watched her dance among the hemlock trees and called out to her. When Lúthien looked upon this ragged survivor, she did not see an inferior mortal. She felt a profound, immediate pity that quickly hardened into devotion. By the strict laws of this world, men die and leave the physical universe, while elves are bound to the earth as long as it lasts. By choosing to love Beren, Lúthien was actively defying the biological and spiritual boundaries set by the gods themselves, linking her eternal soul to a creature destined to wither and disappear. Lúthien's father, King Thingol, was outraged. Believing his kingdom was eternally secure behind its magical barrier, he looked down on humanity as a crude, short-lived pestilence and absolutely refused to let a ragged outlaw marry his only daughter. To humiliate Beren and end the romance without executing him, Thingol set a bride price he knew could never be paid. He demanded Beren bring him a single Silmaril. This schematic shows exactly what Beren was up against. The Silmarils were 3 flawless, indestructible jewels containing the primordial light of creation. Morgoth had stolen them, retreated to the frozen north, and embedded all 3 into his heavy iron crown, deep within the volcanic subterranean fortress of Angband, the most heavily militarized stronghold on the planet. No army of elves or gods had been able to breach Angband. By sending one mortal man to walk through the Iron Mountains and rob the Dark Lord's crown, Thingol was handing Beren a carefully disguised death sentence. Beren didn't even make it to Angband. En route, he and his traveling companions were ambushed, captured, and thrown into the dark pits of Tol in Gowroth, a fortress commanded by Morgoth's chief lieutenant, Sauron. Hearing of Beren's capture, Lúthien fled her father's protected realm to save him. Along the way, she gained an unlikely ally, Huan, a legendary horse-sized hound gifted with powers from the gods. Sauron sent waves of giant werewolves to intercept them, but Huan slaughtered every single one. Forced to handle the threat himself, Sauron transformed into the most terrifying wolf to ever exist and lunged. Working in tandem, Lúthien cast a blinding spell, while Huan clamped his jaws onto Sauron's throat, forcing the dark sorcerer to flee. Morgoth's empire operated on industry, fear, and brute magical dominance. Yet here, a princess armed with a song and a loyal hound physically dismantled one of the Dark Lord's most lethal outposts, stripping away its defenses through sheer will and devotion. Using flayed pelts of the werewolf they killed as disguises, Beren and Lúthien journeyed north until they reached the soot-choked gates of Angband. Standing guard was Carcharoth, a monstrous, poisoned wolf bred by Morgoth himself. Lúthien channeled her magic, casting a heavy sleep over the beast, and the pair slipped inside. Their descent took them through winding, ash-filled tunnels, past legions of sleeping orcs and balrogs, down to the nethermost hall of the world. There, the disguises fell away, and they stood totally exposed before the towering, soot-stained throne of Morgoth. Knowing violence was useless, Lúthien offered to sing for the Dark Lord. As he listened, her voice wove a spell of immense, inescapable weight. The iron crown grew heavy, Morgoth slumped forward off his throne, and his entire subterranean court collapsed into a sudden, unnatural coma. With the room paralyzed, Beren drew a specialized dwarven blade called Angrist. He carved into the iron band of the crown, managing to pry one glowing Silmaril free. But as greed took hold, he tried to cut out a second. The blade violently snapped, sending a sharp shard of steel ricocheting against Morgoth's cheek. The Dark Lord groaned, and the spell began to break. The lovers sprinted back up the tunnels, but the guardian wolf Carcharoth was now awake and blocking the exit. Beren held up the burning Silmaril, hoping the holy light would repel the beast. Instead, Carcharoth lunged forward and bit off Beren's right hand at the wrist, swallowing the jewel whole. The holy light of the jewel immediately began burning the dark creature's insides. Carcharoth went completely mad with agony, tearing out into the world. By surviving the heist, Beren had technically fulfilled his oath to Thingol to hold a Silmaril in his hand, but that hand was now digesting inside the stomach of a rabid, unstoppable monster. Driven to a frenzy by the burning stone in its gut, Carcharoth blitzed south. The wolf tore straight through the magical girdle of Melian, ravaging the peaceful forests of Doriath. To stop the slaughter, King Thingol, Beren, and the great hound Huan mounted a desperate hunt. They cornered the beast in a dark valley. Huan intercepted Carcharoth's strike, and the two massive wolves tore each other apart. The beast was killed and the Silmaril was cut from its stomach, but the victory was hollow. Both Huan and Beren had sustained massive poisoned wounds, and Beren died shortly after. Elves do not succumb to physical illness, but they can die of a broken heart. When Lúthien learned of Beren's death, the sheer magnitude of her grief caused her physical body to shut down, sending her immortal spirit out of the living world to follow him. Her soul traveled to the Halls of Mandos, the vast waiting room of the dead. Standing before the unyielding god who judged the souls of elves and men, she sang a dirge, weaving together the shared sorrows of both races. For the first and only time in the history of the universe, the Lord of the Dead was moved to pity. The strict barrier between the fate of elves and the fate of men had been absolute. By bringing her song to the underworld, Lúthien bypassed the boundaries of biology and magic, bending the immutable cosmic laws of death purely through the immense weight of her sorrow. Mandos granted them a second life in Middle-earth, but under a heavy condition. To stay with Beren, Lúthien had to permanently surrender her elven immortality. They would both live out their days in a quiet forest, eventually dying the final, permanent death of men. This story of sacrifice and border-crossing devotion was deeply personal to J.R.R. Tolkien. The legendary romance between an outcast soldier and an untouchable beauty was heavily inspired by his own relationship with his wife, Edith, whom he met shortly before deploying to the trenches of World War I. If you visit their shared grave in Oxford today, you can see exactly how the author viewed their partnership. Carved directly into the granite beneath Edith's name is the title Lúthien, and beneath John's is Beren. Within the fiction of Middle-earth, this single choice echoed through the centuries. Lúthien's decision to become mortal introduced divine and elven blood into the race of men, seeding the royal lineage that would eventually produce Elrond, Elros, and generations later, Aragorn. The theft of one jewel forged a lineage that would continually rise up to save the world.